Good morning, and welcome to the Human Progress and Flourishing Workshop. I am Allison Fulton, and I am the Communications Coordinator for the Challey Institute. Today, I am honored to introduce you to today's guest speaker, John Bitzan. John is the Menard Family Director of the Sheila and Robert Challey Institute for Global Innovation and Growth, and a Professor of Management at North Dakota State University. He studies transportation economics, the impacts of regulation, and market structure and performance. His research has spanned public policy issues related to railroads, airlines, motor carriers, waterways, and public transit, including examining economic issues such as transportation costs, energy consumption, pricing, profitability, and regulatory change. Dr. Bitzan has co-edited 3 books on transportation economics and published research in top academic journals such as the Southern Economic Journal, Journal of Law and Economics, Journal of Transportation Economics and Policy, Review of Industrial Organization, and more. His work has also been published in Entrepreneur Magazine, The Wall Street Journal, The Hill, Washington Examiner, and Newsweek. Dr. Bitzan has worked at NDSU since 1990. Prior roles include the Associate Dean of the College of Business and an Advanced Research Fellow with the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute. He received his master's degree in applied economics from Marquette University and his PhD in economics from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Please join me in welcoming John.
Thanks, Allison, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm super excited to be able to present in the Human Progress and Flourishing Workshop for the first time. And so I'm excited to present on the results of a nationwide survey that we did of college and university students, trying to assess their understanding of human progress, their views on free speech and viewpoint diversity, and understanding of capitalism and socialism and their implications. So just to start out with our methodology, we did a nationwide survey in collaboration with College Pulse. We surveyed 2,250 college and university students, undergraduate students at 4-year universities, and they were at 131 different universities. You can see the demographics of the students that were in our survey. Notice that we have political leanings in there as well. We asked them about that because you'll see that the answers to the questions oftentimes vary based on political leanings. And College Pulse applies a post-stratification weight to make sure that we have a representative sample of college and university students. So I want to start out by asking, what is the telos of a university? And so this is a picture of Aristotle. And Aristotle said that everything has a telos, or an end purpose and end goal. And so if you think about what is the telos of business, the telos of business is to earn profit. What is the telos of a knife? To cut sharply. What is the telos of an automobile? To provide efficient transportation. What is the telos of medicine? Health. And so let's think about this in the context of a university. When we think about a university, we know that universities aim to educate students, but beyond that, what is the purpose? What is the end goal of a university? I think we can get some insights by looking at the crests of some very famous universities. So if we look at Harvard, we can see that their crest has veritas, so in Latin, so that means truth. If you look at the University of Pittsburgh, they have in their crest, truth is virtue. If you look at Northwestern University, it says all that is true in their crest. Look at Seoul National University, their crest says, truth is my light. If you look at Washington University in St. Louis, it says strength through truth. And Yale University says light and truth. And so if you look at the mission statement of any university, you're probably going to find something about seeking the truth or advancing knowledge. And NDSU is no exception. So if you look at NDSU's mission is we provide transformational education, we create knowledge through innovative research, and we share knowledge through community engagement that meets the needs of North Dakota and the world. So again, you get that theme of advancing knowledge in NDSU's mission. So if you look at how do universities advance knowledge? So let's think about how universities advance knowledge. So in any scientific field, in order to advance knowledge, we use a scientific method. So roughly the scientific method is we make an observation about the world. But because the world is so complex, we oftentimes have to create models that simplify from the reality of the real world. Again, because it's too complex to try to make hypotheses about the real world otherwise. So in economics, one very simple model we have of markets is we have a model of markets where we have supply and demand. And then we develop a hypothesis. And so developing a hypothesis, if you think about, let's say that we're talking about economics, okay, one hypothesis we might have is we might say that if the price of gasoline goes up, we expect consumption of gasoline to go down. Okay, because again, the price is higher and people are going to consume less if we hold other things constant like income levels, prices of automobiles, prices of substitute fuels, etc. And then the next step is that we're going to test a hypothesis. So we may have data over time on gasoline prices, and we have the quantities that people consume over time, we have income levels, we have automobile prices, etc. And then we test our hypothesis. But in general, in science, we can test a hypothesis and we can prove that a hypothesis is false, but we never can prove that it's true. So we can provide support for our hypothesis, and then we test it, we test it, we test it, we test it. Then we publish our results, and our results are going to go through peer review, and then the scientific community is going to continually scrutinize our results. And so in science, we're always open to the fact that we may be presented with new data, we may get new information that that makes us change our mind about a particular hypothesis. So it's wrong to think that the science is ever settled. Again, so there's always a possibility that we can advance science by coming up with some new knowledge that we didn't know about before. In addition, we already talked about that universities also try to educate students. So what is the number one skill that universities aim to provide to students? And this is not based on a survey, but I'll bet if you ask people at universities nationwide, if you did a survey, in the top 3 would be critical thinking. I think it's difficult to talk to anyone at a university and ask them about what they teach without them saying that we teach critical thinking. And so if you look at how do we define critical thinking, there are several different definitions. One definition that I really like is the one from UC Berkeley. It says that critical thinkers rigorously question ideas and assumptions rather than accepting them at face value. They will always seek to determine whether ideas, arguments, and findings represent the entire picture, and they're open to finding that they are not. So they're always open to the idea that they may be wrong. Okay, I may think that I'm right on a particular issue, but then new evidence comes up that makes me change my mind. I'm open to changing my mind. Interestingly, the National Association of Colleges and Employers did a survey of employers in 2022, and they asked employers what kinds of skills are important for college graduates to have. 98.5% of employers said critical thinking is an important skill for college graduates to have. But only 56% said that the college graduates that they were interviewing were proficient in critical thinking. And so I want to ask a question is, can universities seek the truth and teach critical thinking while only considering one point of view? Okay, so I think it's pretty obvious from what we just talked about that they cannot. In other words, if you want to advance scientific knowledge, if you want to seek the truth, okay, you have to be open to new points of view, you have to be open to new data. If you want to engage in critical thinking, you have to understand other points of view beyond your own point of view. Okay, you have to know why your point of view is right, why the other point of view is wrong, or maybe you change your point of view if you understand the other point of view. I think this was stated very eloquently by John Stuart Mill in On Liberty, 1859. John Stuart Mill said that he who only knows his own side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good, and no one may have been able to refute them. But if he's equally unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, If he doesn't even understand what the reasons are on the opposite side, he has no ground for preferring either opinion. So again, if you don't even understand what the arguments are on the other side of an issue, okay, you have no reason for knowing that you're on the right side of that issue. Okay, if you do understand the arguments on the other side, you may have more nuance in your point of view. It may make you change your point of view. It can help you to sharpen your own arguments because you know the legitimate arguments on the other side as well. So free speech has also played a very important role historically in protecting minorities. So the founding fathers of our country, when they were developing the Constitution, they understood the tyranny of the majority. So tyranny of the majority means if you have just a pure democracy, that the majority can just exert their will on everybody else and just trample the rights of minorities. And so that's why there are all kinds of protections in place in our Constitution that are aimed at protecting minorities. Okay, one of those protections, which was not in the original Constitution, but they had talked about it already in the Constitution, which is in the Bill of Rights, is the First Amendment. And the First Amendment has played, as I already said, an extremely important role in protecting the rights of minorities. So if you look at some of the speeches of Martin Luther King Jr., he has highlighted very heavily how important the First Amendment was and how important free speech was in the civil rights movement. Another really good example is John Lewis, who also was an important civil rights leader, and he said that without free speech, the civil rights movement would have been a bird without wings. So it's important to understand that to protect minorities, we need free speech. So I want to go now to the survey that we did of college students nationwide. And the first question, and I want to ask everybody in here to also answer this question. So you have to raise your hands one way or the other. You have to participate. Otherwise, I'm going to ask you to leave. Okay, I'm just kidding about that. But okay, so I want to ask you, so you might, I know that you're not all college students. Okay, I mean, I know Dave is a college student, but not everybody is a college student here. And so even if you're not a college student, answer this in the context of a group rather than a class. So do you feel comfortable sharing your opinion on a controversial or sensitive topic in class or in a group? So how many people would say yes, you feel comfortable sharing your opinion on a controversial or sensitive topic in class? Raise your hands. Okay, how many people say no, they are not comfortable? Okay, so I would say it's pretty mixed here. So if we look at this in our nationwide survey, we find that 71% of students in our nationwide survey said they're at least somewhat comfortable sharing their opinions on controversial or sensitive topics in class. But only 23% say they are very comfortable sharing their opinions on controversial or sensitive topics in class. And this varies by political ideology. So if we look at liberal-leaning students, 79% say they are at least somewhat comfortable sharing their opinions on controversial or sensitive topics in class. Conservative students, it's only 59% say they are at least somewhat comfortable sharing their opinions on controversial or sensitive topics in class. So if you look at this alone, it looks like, well, you know, most students aren't self-censoring. They're willing to share their opinions on controversial or sensitive topics in class. Okay, free speech seems pretty good. But then we asked the students that said they were comfortable, why are you comfortable sharing your opinions on controversial or sensitive topics in class? And we found that half the students that said they were comfortable sharing their opinions on controversial or sensitive topics in class said the reason they were comfortable is because they think that the views of most other students and their professors align with their own views. So they're not really comfortable. They're saying, I'm comfortable sharing my views because I think other people's views align with me. Okay, in the current environment, they're comfortable. Okay, but then the other half actually are comfortable regardless of what other people's opinions are. Then we asked students who said they're not comfortable sharing their opinions on controversial or sensitive topics in class, why aren't they comfortable? And we found that of those students, 72% said the reason they're not comfortable sharing their opinions on controversial or sensitive topics in class is that they think that their opinions would be considered unacceptable by other students. 45% think their opinions would be considered unacceptable by professors, and 47% are concerned about their reputation. When we compare this between liberal-leaning students and conservative-leaning students, we find that conservative-leaning students are more concerned about professors' opinions and their reputation in comparison to liberal-leaning students, but most students are concerned about the opinions of other students. So the next question we asked students in our survey, and I'm not going to ask you this question, but do professors create a classroom climate in which people with unpopular views would feel comfortable sharing their opinions? And we find that most students say, yes, that's true. 73% say that the classroom climate is one where professors allow people with unpopular views, or they would feel comfortable sharing their opinions. Okay, so that seems okay. Then we ask the question, if many students disagree with the views of someone who's been invited to speak on campus, should the university withdraw the speaker's invitation? So I want to ask everyone in here, okay, so if many students disagree with the opinions of a speaker that has been invited to campus, should that speaker be disinvited? How many people would say yes? Okay, raise your hands, nice and high. Are you raising your hands?
I don't know where I land on this.
Okay. Okay, how many people say yes on this? Okay, we don't have anyone saying yes. We have one maybe. Okay. Okay, and then how many people would say no then? Okay, we have a lot of no's and we have one maybe. Okay, still, and maybe a few maybes. So when we asked students in our nationwide survey about this question, we found that over a third of them said that the speaker should be disinvited if many students disagree with the opinions of the speaker that's been invited to campus. Okay, although 65% say they should not be disinvited, okay, to me this is disturbing. This represents an environment where there is not free speech. If you're saying that somebody's opinions I disagree with, so I don't want them to speak on campus, okay, to me that shows an illiberal environment that's not open to free speech. The next question is, if a required reading for a college class, and I'm going to ask everyone in here, includes content that makes students feel uncomfortable, should that reading be dropped as a requirement? How many people say yes? Okay, don't be shy, raise your hands nice and high. Okay, how many people say no? No. Okay, so majority says no in this case. When we asked students in our nationwide survey about this, 42% said that if a required reading in class includes content that makes students feel uncomfortable, the reading should be dropped as a requirement. Okay, what about if a professor says something that students find to be offensive? Okay, if a professor says something that students find to be offensive, should that professor be reported to the university? Okay, how many people say yes? Okay, so we have some yeses. Okay, how many people say no? Okay, not everybody raised their hands, so I'm going to ask you one more time. How many people say yes? Okay, how many people say no? Okay, Bryn, did you raise your hand? Okay, thank you. Okay, so yeah, we have kind of mixed here. So
I have a question because if I'm allowed to ask this question now.
Okay, I'll just wait till the end. I'm sorry, I don't mean to I know what your question's going to be, and I think I addressed it. Maybe not, but please ask the question at the end. So when we asked students in our nationwide survey about this, 74% said that professors should be reported if they say something that students find to be offensive. Okay, one question that we have received, and this might be your question, if it's not, please ask at the end of the presentation, but one question, so this is the third year of our survey. First 2 years of our survey, we got something very similar to this in terms of an answer. And people said, well, maybe students are worried that professors are going to, launch sexual harassment or personal attacks on students or racial attacks on students, things like that. And so we added extra questions in the survey this year to get at that. Okay, is that what's going on or not? And so I'm going to ask you your answers on the following statements. So we asked students in our survey, which of the following statements should professors be reported for making, in class or outside of class? Okay, so the first one is, It is clear that affirmative action is doing more harm than good and should be eliminated. Okay, if a professor says that in class, how many people say yes, the professor should be reported for saying that? Okay, how many people say no, they should not be? Okay, majority of people say no on that one. What about if a professor says, if you look at the data, there is no evidence of anti-black bias in police shootings. Okay, should the professor be reported for saying that? How many people say yes? Okay, how many people say no? Okay. What about if a professor says, owning a gun is a right of every US citizen? Should the professor be reported for saying that? How many people say yes? Okay, how many people say no? Okay, most people say no. Okay, what if a professor says, biological sex is a scientific fact? There are two sexes, male and female. Should a professor be reported for saying that? How many people say yes? Okay, how many people say no? Okay, most people are saying no on these. What if a professor says, requiring vaccination for COVID is an assault on individual freedom? Should a professor be reported for saying that? How many people say yes? Okay, how many people say no? Okay, most people say no. Okay, in case you're thinking that these are all going to be on one side, you'll see the next ones here. What if a professor says, those who want to eliminate affirmative action are perpetuating white privilege? Okay, should the professor be reported for saying that? How many people say yes? Okay, how many people say no? Okay, no's. What if a professor says, it's clear that we have a problem with racist police in the United States shooting unarmed black men? Okay, should the professor be reported for saying that in class? How many people say yes? Okay, how many people say no? Okay, mostly no again. What if a professor says, a civilized society doesn't need guns? Okay, should the professor be reported for saying that? Say yes. Who says yes? Okay, who says no? Okay. What if a professor says there are a wide variety of sexes? Sex is not binary. Should the professor be reported for saying that? How many people say yes? Okay. How many people say no? Okay. And then finally, what if a professor says not getting vaccinated for COVID is irresponsible and inconsiderate to others? Should the professor be reported? How many people say yes? Okay. How many people say no? Okay, so if you look at all of these statements, okay, these statements are not sexual harassment. These statements are not personal attacks on students. These statements are not racial attacks. Okay, these are statements of fact or opinion. Okay, they're statements of opinion or fact. And so we asked students in our nationwide survey the same questions. We found that 65% said that professors should be reported for making one or more of those statements. And just in case you think, well, maybe is this all, liberal-leaning students? No, it's both liberal-leaning and conservative-leaning students that want to report other people that have differences of opinion than them. So if you look at this by liberal and conservative students, we find that 75% of liberal students are in favor of reporting professors for stating one or more of these statements, and 41% of conservative-leaning students are in favor of reporting professors for one or more of these statements. And then I want to ask everyone in here, so let's say a student says something that other students find to be offensive. Should the student be reported to the university? How many people would say, yes, the student should be reported? Okay, how many people say no? And so in our nationwide survey, we found that 58% of students say that other students should be reported if they state something that other students find to be offensive. So there's an apparent contradiction here. So if we look at broad measures of openness to diverse points of view, we see that it looks like the campus climate is pretty open to free speech. We see that 84% of students say that the classroom climate allows diverse points of view. 83% say professors encourage a wide variety of perspectives. 73% say unpopular views are welcome in the classroom. And again, 71% of students say they're at least somewhat comfortable sharing their opinions on controversial or sensitive topics in class. However, when we start looking at opinions on whether students are in favor of taking actions to prevent other people from speaking, it doesn't look like the classroom climate is so open. So 31% are in favor of dropping readings that students disagree with. 31% are in favor of dropping class discussions that make students feel uncomfortable. 35% are in favor of disinviting speakers. 42% are in favor of dropping readings that make students feel uncomfortable. And 74 and 58% are in favor of reporting professors and students that say something they deem to be offensive. And so I just did just for exploratory purposes. This is not causality, but it's consistent anyway with what I'm looking at here. So I'm wondering, the students that are reporting that the classroom climate is broadly open to different points of view, do they really feel it's open to different points of view, or do they feel it's open to their points of view and they're not going to be the ones that are reported and canceled? So in other words, I'm looking at, are they viewing it as free speech for me, but not for thee? And so if you look at these actions in the bottom, these 6 different things that students could do, okay, I created a variable that takes a 0 or 1 value for each of these. So if a student's in favor of dropping readings, that variable gets a 1. If they're not in favor, it gets a 0. If they're in favor of reporting professors, it gets a 1. If they're not in favor, it gets 0. So there's 6 different actions. I created 1 variable by summing these all up. So we have 1 variable that goes between 0 and 6. 0 means they're not in favor of taking any of these actions. 6 means they're in favor of doing all of them. So they're in favor of dropping readings, disinviting speakers, reporting professors, reporting students, all 6 of those things. And so I'm calling this variable willingness to take illiberal action, okay, so prevent others from speaking. Okay, and I just did a exploratory regression. It's exploratory, it's not causal, but I just thought it would be interesting to look at the issue I just mentioned. So I just want to focus on 2 variables. Okay, we don't have a ton of time, so I'm just going to focus on 2 variables. So one is students that report that the classroom climate is one where people with diverse views would feel comfortable sharing those views. The students that say the classroom climate is open to that are also more in favor of reporting other students and reporting professors. The students that say the classroom climate is one where people with unpopular views would feel comfortable sharing those opinions, those students also are more in favor of preventing other people from speaking. So this is evidence consistent with, it doesn't prove anything, but it's consistent with the idea that these students are saying the classroom climate is open to my points of view, okay, but not necessarily to everyone's points of view. I want to focus now on the second part of our survey. The second part of our survey looks at student understanding of human progress. So why should we understand the state of the world and how it has changed? Well, first of all, we really should understand the world and how it's changed if we want to understand how the world changes and how we can make improvements. Okay, a second reason is we should understand the world so that we understand the most important things that we should focus on if we want to make improvements in the world. And then a third reason is that we should also know the things that we should be worried about and form expectations about the future. Okay, and then finally, understand your role in making the world better. Okay, so in our survey, we asked students, do you believe that your college education is helping you develop a more accurate view of the world? And we found that 73 or 77% said yes, college is helping them develop a more accurate view of the world. So has the world gotten better? And I want to ask everyone in this class if the world has gotten better. And it depends on what we're looking at. So I'm going to ask you just in terms of 3 different things, and you have to vote on these things as well. So first of all, what about in terms of extreme poverty? So since 1990, has extreme poverty in the world gotten worse? Has extreme poverty in the world gotten better? Or has it stayed the same? How many people think that extreme poverty has gotten better in the world since 1990? Okay, how many people think extreme poverty has gotten worse in the world since 1990? Okay, how many people think it has stayed the same? Okay, most people think that it has gotten better, and many people have had this class. And in 1990, 38% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. Today it's 9%, so it's gotten markedly better. if you look at what about global life expectancy, what's happened to global life expectancy since 1973? Sorry about that. So how many people think global life expectancy has increased since 1973? Raise your hand. How many people think it's decreased? How many people think it stayed the same? Okay, so again, global life expectancy has gotten much better. In 1973, global life expectancy was 58 years. Today, 71 years. Okay, what about literacy since 1980? Has literacy improved or decreased? How many people think it's increased since 1980? Decreased? Stayed the same. Okay, so literacy in 1980 was 56%. Now it's 87%. So all these things have gotten remarkably better over time. But when we ask students in our nationwide survey about this, we find that we ask them in terms of extreme poverty, literacy, life expectancy, and hunger. Has the world gotten better over the last 50 years? Has it gotten worse? Has it stayed the same? Only 47% said the world has gotten better over the last 50 years. So why has the world gotten better over the last 50 years? I think that there's strong evidence that increased economic freedom has led to increased prosperity. When I talk about increased economic freedom, we're talking about smaller government, protection of property rights, a predictable legal system, stable inflation, free international trade, limited regulation of labor, credit, and business. And a study in 2022 by Robert Lawson reviewed over 700 different studies that examined the relationship between economic freedom and human flourishing. He found that 51% found a positive relationship between economic freedom and human flourishing. He found only 5% found a negative relationship, and the remaining 45% found no relationship. So pretty good evidence that economic freedom has led to increased prosperity. A couple of graphs from the Fraser Institute that I think are very interesting. Fraser Institute measures economic freedom in the world every year. And this shows poverty rates in the least economically free countries compared to the most economically free countries. So in the least economically free countries, depending on how you measure poverty, poverty ranges between 32% and 74% of the population. In the most economically free countries, ranges between 1% and 5.5% of the population. If we look at life expectancy in most economically free countries versus least economically free countries, life expectancy in the least economically free countries, 65 years, most economically free countries, 81 years. Okay, so pretty good evidence that economic freedom has led to increased prosperity. A really good example is China. In 1978, they started pursuing economic reforms under Deng Xiaoping. They phased out agricultural collectives, they privatized farming, they eliminated the state monopoly on foreign trade, they allowed foreign investment, they reduced trade barriers. What happened to extreme poverty in China? In 1980, extreme poverty in China was 90% of the population. By 2016, it had decreased to 4% of the population. And so what about students in our survey? For students that think, we asked the students that say the world has improved over the last 50 years, why has it improved? For those students, they're much more likely to attribute it to increased economic and political freedom than they are to increased government rules, regulations, and ability to redistribute resources. But on the other hand, we also ask students who think the world has gotten worse, why has the world gotten worse over the last 50 years? And those students are more likely to attribute it to not enough government rules, regulations, and ability to redistribute resources than they are to not enough economic and political freedom. So I think this is really interesting because it suggests that students that understand human progress also have a better understanding of the mechanisms that lead to human progress. So I think that's a really important finding as well. So based on what you've learned in college so far, we ask students, are they optimistic or pessimistic about the future of the world? Because students don't have a great understanding of the progress that we've made, it probably isn't surprising to you that students tend to not be very optimistic about the future of the world. Only 30% say they're optimistic about the future of the world. Do you believe that your college education is helping you develop a more accurate view of the United States? We asked the same questions of the US that we asked of the world. We found that most students, in fact, say that college is helping them develop a more accurate view of the United States. And then we asked them, based on what you've learned in college so far, do you think that over the last 50 years, the United States has improved in terms of per capita income, life expectancy, and education levels? And we found that, and this is at a time when these things have improved remarkably. So if you look at real per capita income over the last 50 years has more than doubled in the United States. Okay, life expectancy has gone up by over 6 years over that time period. Okay, if you look at education levels, in 1975, only 62% of 25-year-olds had a high school education. Now it's over 91%. Okay, college education similarly was like 17% in 1975. Now it's over 38%. Okay, so again, these things have improved remarkably, yet students in our survey, only 41% think the United States has gotten better over that time period. Just like we found in looking at students' understanding of progress in the world, we asked the students that said that the United States has improved over the last 50 years, why has it improved? And we found that they were much more likely to attribute it to a dynamic marketplace where entrepreneurs and others innovate to solve problems than they were to attribute it to increased government programs to redistribute resources. But on the other hand, when we ask students who think that the United States has gotten worse, why has it gotten worse? They're more likely to attribute it to not enough government programs to redistribute resources than they are to regulations that prevent innovators from solving problems. Okay, so again, I think it provides evidence that the students that understand the progress we've made have a better understanding of the mechanisms that lead to that progress. So you probably are not surprised that most students are not optimistic about the future of the United States either. Only 25% say they're optimistic about the future of the United States. And then we asked students, are you optimistic about your own futures? And we found that only 52% say they're optimistic about their own futures. And to me, yeah, it's over half, but I would think that college should be one of the most optimistic times in your life. And so I hope that we can get that higher. 52% is not, I think that's still not a great, even though I'm optimistic, I don't think that's an optimistic statistic. I think it should be much higher than 52%. So then I want to focus on the third section of our survey. The third section of our survey focuses on student views on capitalism and socialism. So the first question I want to ask is, do views on capitalism and socialism matter? Well, yes, of course they matter. Prosperity is affected by economic systems, and so it's important that we understand the implications of capitalism and socialism. Also, if we want to have a debate on the merits of capitalism or socialism, we should have a common understanding. Let's say that I say capitalism is great, okay, and Ahmad said capitalism is the worst, okay? If we're not even talking about a common definition of capitalism, how can we have an intelligent debate about it? Okay, so it's important that we have common definitions. And also determining the desirability of a particular economic system depends on whether you advocate for it or against it, depends on your understanding. And so, in other words, if I think that socialism is awesome, okay, and let's say that somebody else, the person implementing it, has a different definition of socialism than I have, so I say, go socialism, let's go socialism, and then the people implementing it implement something different than what I think it is, I might not like what I bought into, okay? So that, it's very important, I think. This is a very important question. So which of the following definitions of capitalism is correct? So I'm going to quiz everybody in here. Okay, I guess I don't know is an option, so you're okay on that one. Okay, so the first definition is capitalism an economic system in which property is privately owned, exchange is voluntary, and the production and pricing of goods and services is determined by market forces? Okay. Or is it an economic system in which corporations utilize grants, special tax breaks, political connections, and special rules that favor them over competitors to earn profits? Okay. Or is it neither of these? So how many people say definition 1 is a definition of capitalism? Okay, how many people say definition 2 is a definition of capitalism? Okay, how many people say neither one? Okay, so most people picked the free market definition of capitalism. The second definition is cronyism. But let's look at our nationwide survey. So in our nationwide survey, 56% of the students define capitalism as free market capitalism, but 30% define it as cronyism, and 14% say they don't know what capitalism is. So then we asked students, do you have a positive or a negative view of capitalism? And we found that in our survey, more students had a negative view of capitalism than had a positive view of capitalism. So again, just as an exploratory analysis, I wanted to look at what kinds of things influence students' attitudes towards capitalism. I'm just going to focus on two variables here. So one is the definition of capitalism. Okay, so if you look at the definition of capitalism, if students pick a free market definition of capitalism, they tend to be more in favor of capitalism, have a more positive view of it. But the other thing I want to focus on is professors. So if professors express positive views towards capitalism, students tend to have a more positive view of capitalism. If professors express a negative view towards capitalism, students tend to have a more negative view of capitalism. Probably not surprising. But it suggests that professors are influencing student views on capitalism. So what about the definitions of socialism? So is socialism an economic system in which the types, quantities produced, and prices of goods and services are planned by the government and property is owned by society? Sorry, that was first definition. Or is it an economic system in which individuals and companies make decisions on the types, quantities produced, and prices charged for most goods and services, but government plays a very active role in ensuring that prices are fair and ensuring an equitable distribution of resources between rich and poor? Okay, or is it neither of these things? Okay, so how many people say it's definition 1? Okay, how many people say definition 2? Okay, Enrique, were you just raising your eyebrow? I didn't see you vote on that. Okay, so how many people? Okay, so yeah, so definition 1 is the classic definition of socialism. Okay, is central planning. Definition 2 is like a hyper-redistribution definition of socialism. But if you look at actual socialism, okay, and if you went to the presentation by Bob Lawson, you know that the first definition is actual socialism. And so when we ask students in our survey, more students define socialism as hyper-redistribution than as classic socialism, central planning. Do you have a positive or negative view of socialism? We found that more students have a positive view of socialism than a negative view of socialism. And then just as an exploratory analysis, I wanted to look at things influencing student attitudes towards socialism. If students define socialism using the classic definition, central planning, they tend to have a more negative view of socialism. And professors, in fact, are influencing views towards socialism in positive and negative ways. Okay, so in summary, our findings show that universities and colleges are not open to different points of view as much as they should be. We also found that a lot of students aren't aware of human progress. They tend to be less optimistic about the future and their role in creating the future because of that lack of knowledge of human progress. And then students don't have a common understanding of capitalism or socialism, and universities are contributing to it. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about solutions. And I think some really interesting solutions come from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE. And FIRE has some really good ones that I think are interesting in discussing at least. First one is to adopt an official commitment to speech. And so just every university should have something written saying that our university places importance on free speech and we're going to put a priority on free speech. Okay, there's something called the Chicago Statement, which is a very famous statement from the University of Chicago. It's just a 2-page statement that states that the university is committed to free speech. Many universities have adopted this. It sends a signal to people that free speech is important. So I'm advocating for it right now at NDSU. Anyone who wants to try to get this, the Chicago Statement adopted, I'll be with you on that one. A second thing is teach students about free speech and academic freedom at orientation. Okay, I would go beyond that. I think that it would be very fruitful to have a class that every student at NDSU has to take on free speech. That class would teach students about the importance of free speech for minorities, why it's needed to protect minority points of view. It's been somehow flipped in academia where it's viewed as a tool of the majority to suppress other people. Okay, that's completely backwards, completely wrong. It's a way to protect minority points of view. I think students need to understand that, and they need to understand the importance of free speech for a university in advancing scientific knowledge and in teaching critical thinking. So I would be in favor of that as well. A third thing that they suggest is getting rid of speech codes and biased response systems. Okay, what does a speech code do? A speech code says, you can't say these things. Okay, these are the things you can say. Obviously, that limits free speech. It limits the ability of people to have constructive dialogue. Okay, biased response teams encourage people to spy on other people and report on other people. If we create an environment where people are encouraged to take notes on other people and report on other people, I think that's going to chill free speech. I think that's a really bad idea. Dave is taking notes on me right now. I just saw that. Okay. Another thing I think is that we should survey students and faculty about the state of free speech on campus, identify are there problems with free speech. We can also measure progress towards more free speech over time. Another thing they suggest is defending students and professors from cancellation. Okay, if you see somebody being unfairly attacked and canceled, okay, make a point of defending them. Other things that we're doing here at NDSU would include a reading group. So we have reading groups that encourage students to look at multiple perspectives, have a robust discussion, teach about human progress and its foundations. We're doing that. We have a class called the Human Progress and Flourishing Workshop. Teach students about economic systems and their implications. We have a class called Market Values that does that at NDSU as well. Just the last slide, I just want to talk about some things that you can do. Okay, so first of all, I would suggest develop in-person real friendships. Okay, if all of your friendships are online friendships, they're not really probably a true friendship necessarily. And you're not, if somebody tries to unfairly cancel you or attack you, they're not going to defend you. They're going to defend you with a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Okay, but if you really want someone to defend you, you have to have true friendship. So I think that's very important. A second thing I would suggest is make friends with people that you disagree with. Okay, not only does it help you see other points of view, but it also helps you to humanize those points of view. Okay, most people that disagree with you want the same goal. Okay, I mean, there aren't people that are like, oh, we want to destroy everything, we want to wreck everything, people things to be bad. I mean, maybe there are some people like that, but most people want the same thing that you want. They want progress, and so it can help you to understand that I may disagree with that person's point of view, but they're trying to do the same thing that I'm trying to do, and it's helpful for me to understand that. I would also say read news outlets that you disagree with. Okay, again, helps you to understand different points of view. Make a point of understanding the argument that opposes your point of view. Okay, it may help you to change your point of view. It may solidify your point of view. It may help you sharpen your arguments. It may help you adopt elements of that and elements of your own point of view. It's always useful to think about that. Avoid ad hominem attacks. Okay, that's one of the most common ways that people argue today. It's one of the worst ways to argue. So do not argue with an ad hominem attack. What is an ad hominem attack? Ad hominem attack is when somebody attacks the person rather than the idea. So it's a way to just shut down the entire argument. So I could say like, well, that person's a conservative, so I don't care about their point of view. That person's a liberal, I don't care about that point of view. Okay, that person's some kind of phobe, so I don't, I'm just going to dismiss that person. So it's dismissing the person and all their arguments without actually addressing the argument itself. Defend other people's right to express their opinion, even if you disagree with it. Okay, you may feel like, the opinions are all on your side right now. Okay, but you'd be surprised that sometimes it could turn against you. So it's always fruitful to defend everyone's opinion, even if it's someone's opinion that you disagree with. I would also say, look at data to understand the world. And then finally, be open to being wrong. I think intellectual humility is something that we need more of in the world. We need more of that at the university as well. understanding that I may be wrong. Okay, you're not always right. Be open to new information that you may be wrong. So with that, thanks a lot for listening to this long presentation. And anyone have any questions, please ask. Jim.
Thank you for sharing this. It's a really important topic, especially I like this idea of adopting Chicago school, model or view perspective on free speech. There's a few points, and you touched on them at the end, that I think would help in presenting this problem. And it's really the assertion. So you started with telos,
Yep.
which is the end of the university is pursuing truth.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
But that's actually invites a presupposition, or requires a presupposition. There's three that we can think about. One, truth exists.
Yep.
Two is supposing that truth exists, it's discoverable. And three, that presuming the first two, we can overcome narrow self-interest in the pursuit of truth to actually discover it. Okay?
Okay.
Now, supposing that we understand, at least we buy into the first two, typically we start thinking about dialectic as a truth-seeking process, potentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're engaging ideas that either don't apply either all three, or think the second one isn't true, or think that self-interest is going to contravene that pursuit. And therefore, and I'm thinking in terms of the reading group I led on Marxism in the Market, we read Resnick and Wolf and Resnick. And they actually explicitly state, so they're Marxist economists, and they explicitly state up front in their book, and they're explaining their methodology, that the ultimate end for Marxians is participation in essentially what is this universal struggle, this battle. And they place that at the top of their hierarchy of interests that they're pursuing in their work. Okay? But that means that truth is being subverted to that, and they simply accept that up front, that truth, to the extent it even exists or it is discoverable, and we can be agnostic on that, is going to be subverted to this pursuit. Okay? So before we can even talk about all these things that you presented to us, we have to have this discussion about, what are our assumptions about truth, 1, 2, and 3. And if we can bring that into light in discussion, I think that it's going to bring a lot more clarity to what you're actually pursuing in this project.
Okay, so to try to summarize the question for the Zoom audience, okay, you're saying that all the arguments I'm making assume that truth exists, that it's discoverable, and that it's going to overcome narrow self-interest. Pursuit of it is going to overcome narrow self-interest. I am assuming all of those things, and we could have a broader discussion on, what is truth? Does truth exist? Is it discoverable? So that's a good point. I don't really know how to address that other than you're saying we should have a discussion on whether truth exists and if it's discoverable. I guess we could have that discussion as well. Ahmad.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate it. Very interesting and actually crucial presentation topic. And I just wanted to make a note about the ad hominem attacks.
Yep.
When you did the personal attacks against somebody, just to the students and the young people in the room. So the thing is about ad hominem attacks is that you are failing to address the subject matter of the person's argument, and you're just going after the person itself, which is a very, very unintelligent and illegitimate way of going, because you're basically attributing the negativity that you're attributing to the person to their argument. And I think that we should all, and I'm guilty of this too, is that we should practice to separate the person or the message from the messenger. And especially when it comes to, because of social media and there are very, very famous people out there, and you'll see attacks on them. And the thing is that I would recommend that you don't do that or listen to people that do that, because if you're attacking a person, if you know of a person and you're attacking them, chances are they are doing something important enough for you to know of them. And at the same time, if you were to attack that person, you're attacking their message, but you're also attacking their form of success. And subconsciously what you're doing is that you're actually alleviating that type of success from your life, right? Especially that you don't know this person, you've never shaken their hand, you've never broke bread with them, you've never looked them in the eyes. And so I think just as a piece of advice, and that is actually very, very important. I think that's the most important issue, the ad hominem attacks. Learning to separate the message from the messenger. And that's where, and if you want to do that, you have to be friends with people that you disagree with. People who will say things that may rub you the wrong way, right? But that's it. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, so just to summarize for the online audience, Ahmad just was emphasizing the point about don't use ad hominem attacks, separate the messenger from the message. And again, ad hominem attacks assume that bad people have only bad ideas and good people have only good ideas. And again, it's a really bad way of arguing, but especially in social media, that's the predominant way of arguing, is just to completely dismiss an argument based on an ad hominem attack. And to me, it shows that you really probably don't have a strong argument against the argument. If you have to resort to an ad hominem attack, you can't even, you're saying like, I can't even really address the issue because I don't have a good argument, so I'll just be lazy and say, well, you know, that person's this, okay? So Shane.
So your presentation, it kind of showed that a lot of people have this definition of socialism that's kind of like capitalism, but with like a large welfare state.
Yep.
And I think you kind of see that with people that call them Nordic countries, socialist countries.
Yep, exactly.
And
yep.
so I think one argument that one can make would be that definitions change, and if it's changing at the level of the policy makers as well as the voters, is it such a bad thing that this new definition of socialism is taking form?
Yeah, I'm saying that it's important that we have a common definition. So if we're going to argue on the merits of it, we need to have a common definition. I mean, so, you know, and this was in Bob Lawson and Ben Powell's presentation. They went to the Socialist Convention, and people there had no idea what socialism is. There's this like, you know, flowers and rainbows and everything's going to be great. Okay, I mean, so if you say, well, then socialism's great, you know, and then Bernie Sanders says, well, I know what real socialism is, it's Venezuela. So let's go ahead and implement Venezuela. You said you wanted it, Shane. So, you know what I mean? So, I mean, I think it's really important for people to understand it. We can also have arguments about whether the Nordic, you know, welfare state is good or bad, and we should have those arguments as well. I mean, I don't think that's a good idea either, but that's nothing to do with this presentation. But again, I think, yeah, it's important that we have at least have a common definition so that we're arguing about the same thing and we're advocating for or against the same thing as well. I forgot to repeat the question, but I think you can tell what it was. Yeah, so Elizabeth.
So I'm imagining, I mean, I'm a political scientist, and we have these kinds of conversations a lot in my classes, and I'm imagining one of my students getting hold of the material that I've assigned, reading it, disagreeing with it, and going to my chair and saying, or reporting it to whoever, to my chair and saying, this professor has absolutely bonkers ideas. From my perspective, that's a student engaging with the material, thinking about it critically, developing their own opinion, and exercising their free speech to someone in power about the way they perceive an institution they're part of. And so what's unclear to me in this presentation is why reporting professors would be taken as an attack on free speech or a limitation on free speech, rather than students exercising their free speech the way that we're pushing them. I mean,
Okay, so the question is, why is reporting professors considered an attack on free speech rather than advocating for free speech? And the example given is, I present material to the students. The students go to my chair and they say, this person's a wacko and they have weird ideas. They're expressing their views and exercising their free speech. Okay, so I completely disagree with that, because as a professor, okay, what does that induce me to do as a professor? If I know that if I'm going to present anything controversial in class, the students are going to go run and complain to my chair or the provost or the president, okay, that's going to chill me from speaking. It's going to be like, hey, I'm not going to deal with that. I'm not going to address controversial topics in my class but that's actually the effect it has. So if you read Canceling of the American Mind, so all the students in this class are reading that book. If you read the book, the actual effect, whether it would be on you or not, the effect that it has on most professors is to cause them to self-censor. So it is free speech inhibiting, in my opinion. Odo.
Hi, John. So I just want to add, I don't So I have two questions. The first question
Yeah.
would be, how will you protect free speech instead of encouraging racial slur, sexual harassment? Because it's a fine line to walk.
Yep.
Another thing, when it comes to discussing about the second question about discussing the marriage between socialism and capitalism, economists have been shown for a long time that if you have an efficient market versus if you have a great government, like what we call benevolent leaders, they actually give the same results. Like theoretically, they actually give the same result.
That socialism and capitalism do?
Yeah, because microeconomists especially show you have a benevolent leader, government, who efficiently can help.
Yeah, so, but, okay, so,
But then the problem is like when people are debating, they pick different definitions, just like you said. Because
Okay.
in the real world, it's hard to find a pure capitalism or pure socialism. So that's why I think students often confuse the definition between them.
okay, so yeah, so we're out of time, so, but I am gonna address your questions, but this is the last question. Okay, so the second question was about capitalism and socialism, and you say like if you have a purely benevolent person
And
that,
efficient.
yeah, benevolent and efficient person that is the owners of property in a socialist system, that it ends up being identical to capitalism. Okay, but when have we ever had, that's the argument that's always given for socialism, is that, well, it's never been practiced in its pure form. Well, it's been practiced over and over again. Capitalism's never been practiced in its pure form either, but I think that with the imperfections in the way capitalism has been administered, it's way outperformed any kind of socialism that has been practiced. So I would just say, let's look at the evidence. The evidence in the real world is that capitalism has way outperformed socialism. In terms of definitions, I agree with you that we need to have a common definition if we're going to talk about it. Going back to, you're saying like, how do we distinguish free speech from racial slurs or sexual harassment? Very easy, because free speech does not protect sexual harassment. Free speech does not protect, threats of violence against people. So I mean, I think, it's clear there are limits on what you can say. That's not free speech to sexually harass somebody. I mean, so I think there are clear limits on those things, but I don't think the very important point I want to make is that, especially when we're talking about limiting ideas, opinions or, facts even in some of those statements that people disagree with. I mean, there's people who have all kinds of evidence, scientific evidence in one direction, and people don't like it, and they still say it's unacceptable to present that. I mean, so I think that we definitely need the ability to have a robust discussion about these ideas. But thanks everybody for your questions, and I'm happy to talk questions as long as you want, but the session is over right now. So thanks a lot, everyone. Thank you.